and in which we are co-evolving with other living organisms. This was a major influence on the ecology movement that was burgeoning at that time too. And something also called the deep ecology movement. What is the deep ecology movement? Well, it's an ecological and environmental philosophy promoting the inherent worth of living beings, regardless of their utility to human need, and a restructuring of modern human societies in accordance with such ideas. It's a perspective that argues that the natural world is a subtle balance of complex interrelationships in which the existence of organisms is dependent on the existence of others within ecosystems. Human interference with or destruction of the natural world poses a threat, therefore, not only to humans, but to all organisms constituting the natural order. So this is the philosophy, this is the belief system upon which our ideas of global warming are based. And I think it also may be at the root of the resistance to the understanding that global warming is taking place. Because if you don't have a belief that everything is interconnected, that our ecosystems are dependent upon one another, if you're still holding on to that Newtonian idea of separateness, then the idea that global warming could be happening does not ring true to your worldview. And I think that may be one of the deeper reasons for the resistance to or refusal to see what are increasingly becoming devastating effects of climate change by some. And so, and I know that's a lot to think about, but this idea of separateness is what is at the root of, I believe, everything. Every so-called problem that we have can be sort of traced back to that. The idea that the self or the ego is everything and is at the center of everything. So we have this pattern of thinking that puts the self at the center, the ego at the center. And it's this pattern of thinking that can result in a myriad of things that go on with us today. Health-related issues, mental health-related issues, addiction. So much of human suffering comes from having this self, this ego, that needs to be psychologically defended at all costs. So to believe in something that would imperil that, or to be told that you're wrong in your belief, is one of those things that you would psychologically defend against. We're trapped in a story that sees ourselves as independent, isolated agents acting in the world, but that's an illusion. That self is an illusion. Now, it can be a useful illusion when you have to go through your daily life, the mundane tasks that you have to do, when you have to protect yourself from if you're in dangerous situations, or if you have to perform tasks. You gotta work. You gotta pay your taxes. That can be a useful illusion to have this sense of self. It allows you to focus on certain tasks. But certainly, at the higher level, there's no truth to it. And you can look at how we are, where we are, in a variety of different ways, including the way that I'm talking about, the perspective I'm telling you about. And that's why I always say at the top of the show, this is the perspective I come from, because I want to acknowledge that there are other perspectives too, such as that we're organisms in an ecosystem, linked together, floating out in the middle of nowhere. Or vehicles for passing DNA strands. But to understand, even if you're not a spiritual type of person, but to understand that our interconnectedness isn't just a woo-woo spiritual idea. It's actually a physical truth and reality. And to see that being, exemplified and sort of parodied in a way through one of the most powerful tools we have today, which is the internet. What is the internet but our interconnectedness manifesting in a very concrete way? And our sense of self, as Albert Einstein called it, our sense of separateness, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. So things like meditation can change that by changing your perspective. Things like mindfulness can change that. And, things like chemicals, psychedelic drugs can also assist in that if they're used, with wisdom, and they're used with guidance, and they're used carefully. As I talk about them, I'm talking about their use in clinical settings. I'm not encouraging people to go out and buy these substances, which are still illegal for people to buy. But if you've had these experiences, or you have access to a therapist who can work with you on having them, you may find that they changed your life, or that they did change your life. I'm sure there's many people, within the range of this podcast, who have, had at one time in their life, maybe during college or their teenage years, or what have you, had experiences, had trips, if you will, with psychedelics, whether it be acid or ecstasy. And I think many people carry the memory or the feelings that they encountered with them for a long time, if not all their lives. And if you listen to people who have had this experience in a clinical setting, that's what they're talking about. So this new perspective, this idea of looking at Earth as a living entity, hasn't been around very long, 40 years or so. But Earth Day certainly is an acknowledgement of that, if nothing else. And in this time, when we are seeing how this living entity is responding to the challenges that are out there, we have to be prepared for the changes that are to come. I don't like to be, and I don't mean to be, sounding alarms. Because the truth of the matter is, what's happening is a very healthy reaction of our living entity Earth to whatever poisons and toxins are in the environment. It will change and adapt as it needs to accommodate as much life as it possibly can. So there's no reason for panicking, but there is a reason for well thought out approaches and an acceptance that things are going to change, and how can we best assist the continuation of our own species. How can we best assist the Earth in supporting that? That's all climate change is. But when people begin to scream and shout about, the destruction of the planet and the future of our children and all of this, these are important things. I get it, for sure, they are. But that's what provokes a stubborn reaction from other folks who don't quite see it that way. But if you can understand that we're all working for the same thing here, if you can take the idea of blame out of it, so, okay, yeah, humans are causing climate change. But if we can step back from that, if we can step back from the yelling and the finger pointing, and say, here we are, it's happening. Just like what happened over there in Rockport, Missouri. They now have a shoreline where they used to have farmland. How do we assist and help with this change? And heated rhetoric on either side is not going to bring the practical approaches that we need to take. And neither is not thinking about it, burying our heads in the sand. And that often happens because it feels so overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. Just understanding that the Earth is going to be changing, and we have to adapt to that change. That has to be the primary focus. How do we assist doing that? Bring down carbon emissions? Great. Lower our footprint in the things that we impact in the environment? Great. We're learning new ways to do that. We're discovering new technologies that help us to do that. That's all part of it. That's all part of it. But the truth is that what we are, what this entity, Earth, is much more than the illusion we see. And this is part of the involvement in the illusion that I'm talking about. All right, that's very heady stuff. So perhaps we should take a step down or two and talk about some healthful wellness tips using regarding food and seasonal foods that can help you boost your immune system. So we're getting towards strawberry season now, so there's lots of good reasons to eat them. You can use them in as fresh toppings for your salad or your cereal. Try to find organically or locally grown